You can sense it long before you ever examine your bank account. The climbing rent, the electric bill that used to be annoying but is now terrifying, the grocery trip that somehow costs more every single month. Right now, millions of Americans are waking up, going to work, grinding through long commutes, and still asking the same quiet, painful question. These aren't dramatic headlines or exaggerated stories. They're genuine individuals. A young woman who deposits money into her savings account every payday only to withdraw it right back out for fuel and groceries. A man working 6 days a week, driving 4 hours a day just to reach his job, admitting he can no longer afford the one thing that makes him happy. Households staring at $600 power bills and wondering what they're doing wrong. And the truth is, they're not doing anything wrong at all. Because if you've ever typed cost of living in America 2025 into a search engine, you already know what's happening. Wages aren't keeping up, essentials cost more than ever, and the gap between surviving and living has never felt wider. This video is not just about data, it's about the lived reality behind the numbers. It's about understanding why everything is so expensive, how we arrived here, and what this means for the everyday American who feels like they're running just to stay in place. Stay until the conclusion, because understanding the system is the first step to not getting crushed by it. The generational shift. The first thing you notice when you listen to younger Americans today is not laziness, entitlement, or unrealistic expectations. It's exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from a long day, but the kind that comes from fighting a system that feels heavier every year. In one of the stories that resonated with me the most, a 20-something woman responds to older commenters who tell her to just work harder the same manner they did back in the day. Her answer is blunt. It's not the same. You ruined this country. Behind the anger is something deeper, frustration that the rules her parents played by simply don't exist anymore. And she's right about one thing. The economic landscape has changed in manners that older generations didn't have to face. In the late 70s and 80s, wages and housing still moved somewhat together. You could purchase a home in your 20s without needing a six-figure income or a decade of savings. A college degree didn't require taking on debt that follows you into middle age. Healthcare costs, childcare, vehicle payments, all of them were dramatically lower relative to income. Today, adjusted for inflation, the average worker earns roughly the same as a worker in 1979, while the essential costs of living have exploded by more than 70%. This isn't about blaming one generation. It's about acknowledging that the financial foundation beneath America has shifted. Easy credit and low interest rates inflated asset costs for decades, making homes and investments skyrocket. Corporate consolidation means fewer companies controlling more of the essentials we can't live without, from groceries to utilities to healthcare. When only a handful of players dominate a market, costs don't just rise, they stay high no matter how hard households struggle. And while older generations often had one full-time job that covered a household comfortably, younger generations face an economy where even two jobs barely keep the bills paid. The result is a kind of psychological whiplash. Individuals are told to follow the same steps their parents did: work hard, save consistently, make smart choices. But the mathematics simply doesn't support the promise anymore. The cost of entry into middle-class stability has climbed faster than wages, faster than opportunity, and faster than hope. So when young individuals push back and say, "It's not the same," they're not asking for sympathy, they're asking for honesty. Would you agree that the American economy today demands more effort for less reward than it did a generation ago? The housing crisis. For millions of Americans, the housing crisis isn't an abstract chart or a talking point on the news. It's the moment you sit in your vehicle after a long shift and ask yourself how you're going to make rent next month. One woman in Florida captures this perfectly. She pays $1,300 in rent, a $650 vehicle payment, $300 for insurance, and still has utilities, groceries, and everything else stacked on top. Her voice cracks as she says, "I either consume or I pay my bills." And even then, it's like, which bill is going to be late this month? That isn't mismanagement. That's the cost of housing outpacing the average American paycheck. And the numbers back her up. The median home cost across the country sits around $410,000 to $420,000, nearly 6 times the median household income. A ratio that used to be 3 to 1 has doubled in a generation, turning home ownership into something that requires luck as much as hard work. Even renting, which used to be the affordable alternative, has become its own uphill battle. A typical one-bedroom apartment now averages about $1,500 a month nationwide. Lower than the 2022 peak, yes, but still roughly 15% higher than before the pandemic. In many cities like San Diego, New York, Boston, and Miami, that same one-bedroom easily stretches to $2,500 or $3,000. Housing hasn't cooled. It's simply reached a new expensive normal. Why is it happening? It's not one reason. It's a perfect storm. For years, America didn't build enough homes to meet demand. Construction slowed after the 2008 crash and never fully recovered. At the same time, mortgage rates climbed from historic lows to 6 and 7%, slamming the entrance on first-time purchasers. Investors ranging from individual landlords to massive institutional purchasers stepped in and acquired tens of thousands of homes, turning starter houses into rental inventory. In states like Florida and Texas, property insurance has skyrocketed due to climate risks, pushing monthly ownership costs even higher. When shelter becomes both scarce and expensive, there is no pressure for costs to fall. Households are forced to compete, and competition drives the numbers up even more. The impact isn't just financial, it's generational. The average first-time home purchaser is now in their mid-30s, the oldest age ever recorded. Renting has become a permanent state for many, not a temporary step. Without home equity, wealth gaps widen. Individuals feel stuck not because they won't work hard, but because the entrances to stability are locked behind rising costs and shrinking options. And even for those who manage to secure a roof over their heads, the story doesn't end there, because once you acquire the keys, a whole new set of bills arrives. Bills that often hit harder than the rent itself. Let's discuss those hidden costs next. The hidden costs. For many Americans, the shock doesn't come from the rent or the mortgage. It comes from everything stacked around it. The bills you can't avoid, the ones you don't even consider about until they show up in your mailbox and make your stomach drop. One woman recently shared her electric statements from a hot summer in Texas: $560 for June, $650 for July, and a projection that August would push her past $2,000 in just 3 months. She wasn't running a luxury home, she wasn't wasting power, and she wasn't living large. She was cutting costs everywhere she could, cooking at home, avoiding unnecessary purchases, and it still wasn't enough. And although her bill is on the extreme end, it reflects a nationwide trend. On paper, the average electric bill sits around $150 a month, but that number collapses under real-world conditions. In states with long heat waves, older grid systems, or heavy air conditioning usage, $400 to $600 bills are common during peak months. Water costs have risen sharply across many major cities. Internet service is now a near mandatory household expense, and vehicle insurance rates have spiked nationwide. Taken individually, each increase seems manageable. Together, they form a second rent. Then there's the cost of getting to work. A man shared his routine, driving nearly 4 hours every day, working 6 days a week, and realizing he no longer has the duration or budget for the simple things he enjoys. He's not overreacting. Vehicle payments tell the same story. The average monthly payment for a new vehicle is now over $700, with many drivers paying more than $1,000. Used vehicles aren't cheap either, and between insurance, fuel, maintenance, and rising interest rates, transportation has become one of the largest financial drains on the typical household. But the deeper issue isn't just cost, it's necessity. Most Americans don't have reliable public transit. They can't choose to skip owning a vehicle the manner individuals in dense cities or other countries can. Work is often far from home, and remote options don't exist for millions of jobs. The commute trap reinforces the cycle. You need a vehicle to earn money, but a huge portion of that money goes right back into the vehicle. All of this adds up to a feeling many individuals quietly share, that life has become a long list of non-negotiable payments attached to simply existing. Not luxuries, not upgrades, just survival. And when even those basics stretch the budget to its limit, the next place individuals look is the one cost they can't avoid any longer: provisions. The grocery aisle is where many finally realize how tight things have become. And that's where we're going next. The grocery burden. If there is one place where the cost of living crisis hits every single American, it's the grocery store. You can negotiate your rent, delay a vehicle repair, skip a vacation, or cut streaming services. But you can't stop consuming. And that's exactly why so many individuals are losing control of their budgets in the aisles of Walmart, Aldi, Costco, and local supermarkets. One young woman put it perfectly when she said she tries to save money every duration she gets paid. She sets aside a little, promises herself she won't touch it, and then 2 days later, she's withdrawing it right back out. Not for luxuries, not for impulse shopping, for provisions, fuel, the basics required to get through the next 2 weeks. Every duration I deposit money in my savings, she says, I end up needing it for something essential. That isn't bad planning. That's a sign the essentials themselves have become too expensive. The data tells the same story. According to updated government provision plans, a single adult today typically spends between $300 and $400 a month on groceries depending on the city and the dietary plan. And even after the pandemic era spikes, costs still rise roughly 2 to 3% every year. The painful truth is that provision inflation never fully reversed. It just slowed down while staying at a higher baseline, which means every paycheck purchases a little less than it did the year before. But it's not just the cost, it's the type of provisions individuals can access. In many neighborhoods across the country, especially low-income or rural areas, large grocery stores have closed or consolidated, leaving provision deserts behind. These are communities where residents must rely on convenience stores, dollar stores, or fast provision chains because there is no major supermarket nearby. Fresh produce becomes harder to find and more expensive. Meanwhile, heavily processed provisions stay cheap. The economic result is predictable. Households trying to stretch their dollars end up purchasing what's affordable, not what's healthy. This creates a hidden cost that most Americans sense but rarely discuss. Consuming cheaper today can mean paying more later through higher medical bills, lower energy levels, and stress that compounds with every tough financial decision. Parents ration portions, skip meals, or replace fresh ingredients with shelf-stable alternatives because the mathematics demands it. The grocery bill becomes a source of anxiety, not nourishment. And when even the most basic necessity feels like a financial burden, many individuals ask the same painful question. If purchasing provisions is this hard, what chance do I have with everything else? That sense of falling behind doesn't end at the checkout line. It follows individuals home and shows up in their bills, their credit cards, and the debt they carry month after month. That brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, the growing reliance on credit just to stay afloat. The debt trap. For a growing number of Americans, survival is no longer paid for with cash. It's financed, not because individuals are chasing luxury, but because the basic cost of living has outpaced what their paychecks can cover. One of the clearest examples comes from a creator who laid out her monthly bills: rent, electric, water, vehicle payment, vehicle insurance, groceries, and fuel. Then she asked the question so many households quietly whisper at their kitchen tables: which one of these can I skip this month and try to catch up on later? That's not irresponsible budgeting. That's a system where income and expenses no longer match. Credit cards step in as the buffer, but they come with a cost. Over the last year, American households have pushed total credit card balances to over $1.2 trillion, the highest level ever recorded. The average interest rate now sits above 22%, which means any balance carried from month to month grows faster than most individuals can pay it down. A $5,000 balance can easily turn into thousands more in interest alone if someone can only make minimum payments. And the majority of individuals carrying these balances aren't doing it for vacations or gadgets. Surveys show nearly half of cardholders use their credit cards to pay for essentials: groceries, rent gaps, utility bills, or unexpected vehicle repairs. Medical costs only make the situation harder. Even with insurance, high deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses push households into using credit just to cover routine care. Emergency room visits, specialist appointments, prescriptions, none of it waits for someone to save up. Health issues don't pause for inflation. And when a bill arrives before a paycheck, the credit card becomes the only option. Over duration, these cycles create a quiet pattern. Debt becomes normal, interest becomes expected, and financial breathing room disappears. At the same time, wages have struggled to keep up. When incomes stagnate but costs rise, debt fills the gap. It becomes a tool individuals rely on, not because they want to, but because they have to. It's a bridge between the life someone is working for and the life they can currently afford. But it's also a trap, because every month that balance grows, tightening the financial pressure that millions already sense. What makes this even more difficult is the emotional weight. Individuals know they're trying their best. They're budgeting, cutting costs, and doing everything they can to stay responsible. Yet, the mathematics still pushes them into relying on borrowed money. And with each swipe, the sense of falling behind deepens. If the essentials of life require financing, what happens to an individual's stability, confidence, or long-term goals? And how does this constant pressure shape the manner Americans view their future? That's what leads us directly into the final piece of this picture: the toll all of this takes on mental well-being and the fading promise of the American dream. The emotional toll. When you listen to Americans discuss the rising cost of living, there's a moment when the conversation stops being about money and becomes something much heavier. It's the point where individuals admit they're tired in a manner that sleep can't fix. Tired of working long hours, tired of racing against bills, tired of sensing like progress is always one step out of reach. One creator described his routine: 6 days a week at work, nearly 4 hours of driving a day, and no duration or energy left for the simple things he enjoys. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was trying to make sense of a life where effort and reward no longer match. And that experience isn't unusual. Studies show that a majority of Americans report sensing stressed about their finances on a daily basis. Rising rent, unpredictable utility bills, mounting debt, and the pressure to keep up create a sense of constant strain. Even when individuals do everything right, budget carefully, work extra shifts, cut non-essential spending, they still sense like the ground is moving beneath them. This isn't about personal failure. It's about living in an economy where the cost of stability has climbed faster than most individuals' ability to pay for it. The emotional impact is genuine. Financial pressure influences relationships, household dynamics, and long-term planning. Parents worry about providing for their children. Young adults question whether they'll ever afford a home. Workers wonder if they will ever reach a point where they're not just catching up. Individuals begin to sense disconnected from the future they imagined because the path toward it keeps getting narrower. This is where the idea of the American dream comes into the conversation, not as nostalgia, but as a measure of how expectations have changed. For decades, the promise was simple: work hard, make good decisions, and life will gradually get better. That promise feels more fragile now. Home ownership is delayed by a decade. Savings accounts don't grow fast enough to keep up with rising costs. Economic mobility, the belief that each generation will do better than the last, has slowed. Individuals are not giving up on ambition. They're running into barriers that previous generations didn't face. Yet even with these challenges, many Americans still hold on to something important: the belief that life shouldn't just be about getting by. They want duration with household, space to breathe, the ability to plan for the future. Not perfection, just stability. That desire itself is evidence that hope hasn't disappeared. It has simply become harder to reach under the pressure of today's economy. Which brings us to the final question. If the system feels this heavy, what can individuals take away from understanding it? And how do we make sense of a future where the cost of living keeps rising faster than the opportunities meant to support it? Let's bring all of this together in the conclusion. When you step back and examine everything together, the housing crunch, the rising utility bills, the grocery aisle shock, the reliance on credit, and the pressure it puts on individuals, it becomes clear this isn't just an economic story. It's a human one. The cost of living in America 2025 isn't measured only in dollars. It's measured in stress and duration lost, in the dreams individuals keep postponing because the basics take so much out of them. But understanding the system doesn't mean accepting it. It means recognizing that these pressures aren't personal failures. They're structural barriers that millions are facing at the same duration. The genuine question now is, which part of this reality feels closest to your life? Housing, provisions, debt, or the sensation of running just to stay level? And if this breakdown helped you observe why everything is so expensive with a clearer perspective, hit subscribe and share this video, because no one should have to navigate this economy alone.